Nancy Grace, known for her uncompromising true crime commentary, has famously said, "When it comes to protecting children, there is no excuse for silence."
Cyberbullying. No, this is something else entirely. It's a highly organized system of psychological warfare, of extortion and real-world violence, and it's all aimed at our kids. Let's dive in.
I want you to just read that for a second. That is a direct quote. It's from an actual handbook, a guide that gets passed around online, teaching predators, many of whom are just teenagers themselves, how to systematically and completely destroy a child's life. This isn't a theory. This is their endgame.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty of this call, we really have to understand the foundation it's all built on. How does someone get that kind of life-or-death control over another person? Well, it all starts with a psychological playbook, a specific set of grooming tactics that are designed to literally break down a victim's mind.
And these tactics, they all work together. So first, they alter your reality. They get you to buy into their version of the world, which means you have to sacrifice your own thoughts, your own feelings. Then they use something called neuro-linguistic programming, which is basically just a fancy way of saying they use language to mess with your head, to manipulate your thoughts. It creates this surreal Twilight Zone feeling where you're just constantly off balance. And finally, they start smear campaigns. They lie to you and they lie about you, cutting you off from your friends, from your family, until that predator is the only person you have left.
Okay, so this psychological warfare it's devastatingly effective. But it needs an entry point, right? In a world where we all live so much of our lives online, how do these predators actually get their foot in the digital door?
Well, the scary truth is, they can get in through our most common, everyday habits. They exploit the conveniences we all take for granted. And what I'm about to show you, it's not some super complex Mission Impossible style hack. It's an attack so simple, it can be done with a tiny, cheap device from pretty much anywhere.
Just walk through this with me. Picture it. You're at the airport, maybe a coffee shop. You pull out your phone, you look for a network, and you see one called free Wi-Fi. You connect. I mean, who hasn't done that, right?
A second later, a familiar-looking screen pops up, a portal asking you to log in to get online. It looks legit, maybe like Google's login page or the airport's official site. You type in your email and your password without even thinking about it.
And just like that, it's over. That wasn't the airport's Wi-Fi. It was a fake network, broadcast from a device that's small enough to fit in a pocket. And every single thing you just typed was captured in plain text. Your email, your password, they have it all.
This kind of attack is just trivial to pull off. It's child's play, really. And it shows you a huge vulnerability we all have. The biggest takeaway here is incredibly simple. Just don't trust public Wi-Fi, ever. But here's the thing. While tech attacks like this are a real threat, the 764 called, they often operate much more directly through social manipulation, right inside the apps and games our kids use every day. Okay, so we've seen the psychology of control, and we've seen a glimpse of how these predators can get digital access. Now we connect those pieces. Now we look inside the horrifying reality of the 764 cult.
So, the 764 cult doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger, darker ecosystem online, known as the COM, which is short for the community. Think of it as a loose collection of online groups, mostly teenagers, who are all competing for clout by doxing people, that's leaking their personal info, and swatting them, all for sport, for recognition.
And inside this world, they have their own twisted language. Bricking means filming a real-world attack on a victim's home. Swatting is that potentially deadly prank where you trick police into raiding someone's house. Cut signs are forced self-mutilation as proof of control. And a lure book, that's a digital collage of a victim's humiliation, used as leverage to force them to do even more extreme things. The whole system is built on escalation. It might start with something like a single compromising photo, but it ends with victims being blackmailed into torturing their pets, mutilating their own bodies, or even taking their own lives, all while live streaming it to an audience of their abusers.
And the reaction from the group, when a 14-year-old boy that they had tormented for months finally set himself on fire live on a call, one member was recorded laughing. Another one just commented, almost like he was watching a movie, "That's the worst death possible, man." There's no empathy. It's just content.
And this violence, it absolutely spills into the real world. A 17-year-old member live-streamed himself murdering an elderly woman just to prove his loyalty to these strangers on the internet.
And his sentence for taking a human life to gain clout in a Discord server? Just 14 years.
So this raises a really serious question. All this evil, it's being organized somewhere. These predators are finding their victims somewhere. So, what about the platforms? What about the companies that create the very environment where this danger is allowed to thrive?
I want you to take a look at this number. 75 million. What do you think that could possibly represent?
That is the number of people, mostly children, who play the game Roblox every single day. It's the biggest children's game on the entire planet, and according to investigators, it's a primary hunting ground for the 764 cult and other groups just like it.
And here's the part that's absolutely crucial. Roblox runs on in-game purchases, and the platform takes a 30% cut of every single transaction. Now, this includes the sale of virtual t-shirts that players can design and sell, even shirts that depict real-world violence or openly promote these grooming cults. So they are directly profiting from the exact same culture that is preying on their own users.
Look, this is a massive, absolutely terrifying problem, and I know it can feel completely hopeless. But the first, most powerful step towards any kind of solution is just awareness. It's about understanding the battlefield so that we can actually protect our kids.
So what can you actually do? First, just be aware. Platforms like Roblox, Minecraft, Discord, TikTok, they are not just innocent games. They are massive social networks where predators operate. Second, do your own research. If you hear a term or you see a symbol you don't recognize, Google it. Knowledge is your best defense. Third, and this is without a doubt the most important one, communicate. Build trust. Make sure your child knows, truly knows, that they can come to you no matter what, without any fear of judgment or punishment. And finally, monitor. Don't be a passive parent. You have to be involved in their digital lives just like you are in their real-world lives. We really need to reframe how we think about all of this. When you hand your child a phone or a tablet, you're not just giving them access to the entire world. You are also giving the entire world access to them. So the question we all need to start asking ourselves is, who exactly are we letting in?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Luminous Star channel. I am so happy to bring you another episode today. Don't forget to like and or share this post. Thank you so much. So when it comes to a non-human entity possessing him or her, again, this is not far-fetched. However, it doesn't always have to be the case. So whenever you think about why would the narcissism cluster personality become possessed, just think about that. Evil proposed something to the narcissism cluster personality that it never intended to fulfill. So when narcissism cluster personality, they make a proposition to you and I, and they make all those promises and they break them. That's the same thing that evil does when it proposes something to you and I, and even the narcissism cluster personality. It is dressed in a way that
maybe one day you'll enjoy being members of the family. Behold, the coagulum. There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling the transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it fluffy. We can change the focus to a soft blue. For the next hour, while we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with
Do you feel blame? Are you mad? Do you feel like those who about right now to get
The 5 creepiest serial killer interviews. Reporters use serial killer interviews to get a closer look into the minds and lives of these notorious criminals. Hours prior to his electrocution in the electric chair for the murder of nearly 50 women, serial killer Ted Bundy gave an official interview. Some might find it creepy that Bundy stated that his parents encouraged him in school and were always supportive, yet by adulthood he seems to have had a disdain for others, especially women. Bundy also confessed to having an addiction to and developed an obsession. There are many investigators who have read numerous studies and had spoken to killers after finding the correlation between and violence. Interviews of Ted Bundy helped to shed light on reasons why some people might get hooked on killing, like Jeffrey Dahmer, who admitted in an interview that he developed an addiction to violent pornography. Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history. In 1993, an interview was conducted by Nancy Glass of Inside Edition revealed perhaps some of Jeffrey Dahmer's darkest secrets. In his own words, Jeffrey Dahmer expresses to Glass while he was growing up, he was fascinated with dead things and taking out their entrails. Mummification was the tactic that Dahmer used to not only relive the horrid details, but to keep victims close to him. Shortly after the Inside Edition interview, Jeffrey Dahmer, age 34, was bludgeoned to death by a fellow inmate in prison. Charles Manson, a self-proclaimed messiah of evil, would say that these murders would spawn a race war that he affirmed as helter-skelter. Unfortunately, there were several notable people slain, including the pregnant actress, Sharon Tate, and the coffee heiress, Abigail Folger. When questioned if he had any remorse for murder that he ordered, Manson laughed and stated that he could not bring himself to feel guilt for something that he did not do. He added that he only regrets that he did not kill even more victims, regardless of appearing to be in poor health. He did not display remorse for lives that were taken in his name. Between 1976 to 1977, thanks to postal worker Sam Berkowitz, the city of New York was held in fear as the serial killer ran through the streets until he was arrested and confessed to the killings. In early interviews, Berkowitz claimed that a demon named Sam was taking control of his mind and therefore was not aware of his criminal activity, but changed his story later by falsely accusing an evil cult of brainwashing him. It turns out to be years later that Berkowitz claimed that he did not act alone in the New York murders. John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, oddly claimed that people can find peace within. However, he was responsible for the murder of 33 men and boys over the course of a few years. Gacy said that he had peace and didn't possess any fear of death when he was asked if he was afraid to die. One of the most noticeable things some might conclude about interviewing serial killers is that it reminds us of the unspeakable evils that humans can impose on one another. It remains a mystery to most of what makes these misanthropic serial killers tick.
People often ask whether it's nature or nurture that creates a serial killer. Well, it's actually both and more. I like to say that genetics loads the gun, personality and psychology aim it, and your experiences pull the trigger. Your genetics give you the potentiality to be a killer, but your personality and psychology are the filter through which you experience, and they can shade how you come away from any event in your life. I'm Jim Clemente. I'm a retired FBI supervisory special agent and profiler in the Behavioral Analysis Unit. As a profiler, my job was to hunt down child abductors, serial rapists, and serial killers. We help out where forensics fail. If we look at how the crime was committed, that leads us to why the crime was committed, and that leads us to who committed the crime. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit is part of the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. And as such, we study all violent and crimes across this country and much of it around the world, so that we can then train law enforcement so that they can get the benefit of our research in our training. The original FBI profilers, Dick Ault, John Douglas, Roy Hazelwood, Robert Ressler, Pete Smerick, they gained this body of knowledge by actually going into prisons and interviewing convicted serial killers. They interviewed them in great detail about what they did and also how they grew up and how they felt during the entire time that they were people, developing this criminal expertise, and that they were getting away with these crimes. For example, from Ed Kemper, they learned that he had a very difficult relationship with his mother. So he started surrogates in place of her, and then he killed his mother. David Berkowitz showed how frustration can be taken out on innocent people on the streets of New York. From Ted Bundy, they learned that he was a sadist that he got off on causing and witnessing the pain and suffering of others. But he did that many times by using his psychopathic charm to lure in victims, and he feigned injury so that it was the people who wanted to help him that he ended up killing. So now we have an amazing volume of institutional knowledge about these offenders, and it tells us how they killed and why they killed, and it helps us to hunt them down. Criminal profiling is basically reverse engineering a crime. We look at the victimology, the choice of the victims. We look at the crime scene. We look at the organization level, and then pre and post offense behavior. And together, all those things tell us the kind of person who committed the crime. Victimology is the study of the victim, their life, their desires, their education, their daily routine. Because an offender picks a particular victim at a particular place, at a particular time, in a particular manner, for a particular purpose. And all those choices leak out information about the offender, about their skills and abilities, about their desires, and they can lead us right back to the offender. The crime location can tell us a lot. Did the crime occur on a farm in the middle of Iowa, where the only potential witnesses are a bunch of cows and pigs? Or did it happen in New York City's Times Square, where at any given moment there may be 50 to 100,000 potential eyewitnesses? Pulling off a crime in either of those locations tells you a lot about the offender. At the crime scene, we look at the offender's behavior. How much time did they spend there? What was their interaction with the victims? And what was their criminal sophistication level? The choice of weapons that an offender uses at a crime scene reveals a tremendous amount of information about them. Did the offender use a gun and kill somebody from a distance? Or did they get up close and personal and use a knife? That's a different kind of person who typically is engaged in different kinds of profession than somebody who will not get up close and personal.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Next, we look at the offender's organization level. The two types of offenders that we see are on a spectrum between organized and disorganized. The organized offender will plan it in advance, fantasize about committing the crime, and then bring all the implements necessary to commit the crime, and then take them away with him after the crime. Whereas the disorganized offender is impulsive. They don't plan the crimes out in advance. They may have lowered inhibitions because of drug or alcohol use, and they basically pick up the implements along the way and may leave them behind, leaving a lot of forensic evidence for law enforcement to find. If an offender doesn't have a very high skill level in terms of getting access to victims, they'll pick victims who lead very high-risk lives, prostitutes and drug addicts, whereas a very sophisticated offender will be able to acquire victims in the privacy and security of their own homes. It takes a much different level of criminal sophistication to be able to accomplish those two different crimes. The next level of criminal behavioral analysis is looking at pre- and post-offense behavior. If they're organized offenders, they probably did pre-offense surveillance to check out the location, maybe even surveil potential victims and stalk them. Also, we find that offenders, after they commit a serious criminal offense, will have behavioral changes that people around them might see. For example, if an offender has committed an abduction and murder, they would likely leave the area, making up an excuse, an emergency to get out of town. And they wouldn't return until everything calmed down and they felt it was safe to come back. Building a profile is simply taking all of those 5 factors and looking at what information the offender leaks out by behaving in those particular ways. When I analyze a crime scene, I look at various types of evidence, some of which we have here. Pictures inside the house where the crime occurred, crime scene photographs, autopsy pictures, as well as an affidavit summarizing the facts of the case and the crime scene description. Typically, I'd like to ask a lot more questions and get much more data, but I think we have enough, at least now, to start a preliminary profile. So I'm looking at a case of a double homicide of a male and female. The male appears to be in his early 20s. He was shot about 5 times. He has an unknown relationship to the female victim, who appears to have been pregnant, and she was shot 7 to 8 times in her face and head and upper torso. It also appears that the male may have scrawled in grease several letters. He's found on the floor of the back room by the back door. She's found in a room next to it, half hanging off the bed with her head on a couch that's pushed up right next to the bed. With her head on a couch that's pushed up right next to the bed. It appears that she was first shot while she was laying on her back on the bed, and that she either rolled over to try to get away or was flipped over by someone and shot again, where she died in place. My first impressions are that the male victim was first, that he was a practical kill to get him out of the way, whereas the female victim was shot multiple times in the chest and at least once in the face and another time in the head. She appears to be the main target of this attack. So if we start with victimology, we know that the first victim, the male, grew up in this town and had left town for several years and came back. He's got no known criminal history yet. In this house, $11,000 in cash was found, 3.5 pounds of marijuana was found, and powdery substance that appeared to be drugs was also found. That tells me that they were engaged in a high-risk activity, drug trafficking. But the fact that the drugs and the money were left behind tells me there's a high probability that this was not a drug-related hit. I believe that if drug dealers were involved in this, they would have taken the drugs and they would have taken the cash. This tells me there's a level of immaturity in this offender. Somebody who didn't have the presence of mind to search for these things or didn't even think that they might be there. I would put the intelligence level of the offender at mid to low because they made a flimsy attempt at cleaning up after themselves. And that could also mean that their inhibitions were diminished by drugs or alcohol. Something that's particularly unusual in this crime scene is the letters that are scrawled on the floor, apparently by the male victim, with grease that was squirted onto the floor. They attempt, it appears, to spell out a name, JFF, and then under that BOPE, sort of a last dying declaration. This could indicate either a person or some kind of motive. As a criminal behavioral analyst, I want to determine whether this is an actual message that was left by the dying male or whether this is staging in order to misdirect investigators. So I'd like to know if he had grease on one or more of his hands or fingers, and whether or not he was left-handed or right-handed, and whether or not that was the hand that had the grease on it. The organization level of this crime is fairly low. Even though the offender brought the gun he used to commit the murders with him, he left forensic evidence behind. And that tells me he doesn't have a very high level of forensic or criminal sophistication. When we look at pre- and post-offense behavior, since it doesn't look like he's very criminally sophisticated, this could be one of the only times he committed a crime like this. And I believe that he may have gone into a panic afterwards. I would think that somewhere between where he committed these crimes and where he went, you would find the weapon in a dumpster, a body of water, or a place he thought it would be hidden. I would also expect somebody like that to make an excuse to either leave the area or leave town for a period of time till everything calms down. So in this case, I believe that how the victims were killed tells us a story. I believe he was a practical kill and she was the target of this double homicide. Also, the fact that she was pregnant may indicate that the why was jealousy and that there was another person, sort of a love triangle here, and that the person responsible was the third person in this love triangle or a family member. In the DC sniper case, the entire Washington, D.C. area was terrorized for 23 days. A number of random people were shot and killed or injured. It turns out this was a longer spree that had started in the state of Washington and spanned the entire country. So I became involved in the case because I was working in the behavioral analysis unit at the time, and we consulted on the investigation. Immediately, this case presented as if it were a spree killer. 6 murders in the space of 27 hours. So we didn't think he was targeting a particular type of group. The victimology was completely random. Typically in spree cases, the offender is on the run and commits murder after murder after murder, but decompensates over that time. The rush of adrenaline and the excitement and the fear of getting away, all those things can cause an offender to make more mistakes as time goes on. But in this case, that wasn't happening. The shootings themselves indicated that there was pre-attack surveillance. This offender planned and executed 6 murders within the space of 27 hours and was a ghost. No one even saw him. That told us right away that he had a certain level of calm, cool, and collectedness, that he was probably in his mid to late 40s and had police or military training. But more than that, he must have actually had experience on the streets as a police officer or on the battlefield. Because pulling the trigger on a paper target is one thing, but taking the life of an unknown individual is a whole nother matter. So when we started the profile, we based it only on statistics. And statistically, snipers are in their 40s or 50s, white males, and they have a grudge against society or somebody in particular that they take out on their victims. Another thing about snipers is that they have a God complex. They want to take life from afar and above so they can feel omnipotent like God. And because of that, it's very important to appease them and not challenge them. Unfortunately, that's not what law enforcement was doing at the time. They called them a coward, and they said the streets are safe and the schools are safe. So the sniper shot a kid walking into school the next day. But they left a tarot card, the death card. And on that card, there was indications of duality. First of all, it said, "Call me God," which reinforced our opinion that the sniper had a God complex. And it went on to say, "This is for you, Mr. Police." And that looks as though the writer is looking up to the police, calling them Mr. Police. It also has its origins in a number of reggae songs, so that could mean that the offender had a Caribbean influence. But then it said, "Do not release to the press." And press is an older word, something that older people use, which is consistent with the level of sophistication of planning and executing these crimes, but not consistent with looking up to the police. So for the first time, we had to consider whether this offender was calm, cool, and collected when he plans and executes his murders, but he decompensates when he's writing, or for the first time in US history, we have a sniper team. One older in his mid-40s and one younger in his teens. But the fact is that we know that because snipers have a God complex, they don't work well together. So I theorized that the older one was actually controlling the younger one. And I went as far as saying that he may be controlling him through victimization, because that would give him complete control over the younger person. In fact, 10 years after they were caught and convicted, Malvo disclosed that Muhammad had been sexually victimizing him the whole time. So in the end, our profile was that of 2 snipers working together, both African American, one in his mid-40s, having police or military training and experience, one in his teens. Once we released that profile, and because of other work that the FBI was doing parallel that reinforced our profile, Muhammad and Malvo were arrested within 24 hours. Developing the profile in the DC sniper case was groundbreaking because in the vast majority of previous sniper cases in the United States of America, they were committed by lone offenders who were white, or male, who were in their 40s or 50s with a particular grudge. And this case blew that profile to pieces.
It's Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer and cannibal whose saga of evil has been given new life in the hit Netflix series Monster.
I'm gonna ask you some questions that are tough.
In this never-before-seen video from the Inside Edition archives, he's clearly nervous. His hands won't stay still as he prepares for the exclusive 1993 interview.
What questions are you going to start out with?
A new generation is learning about his horrifying crimes through the #1 Netflix series.
What appears to be a psychopathic mass murder.
Destination 32 clear.
This world-exclusive interview took place inside the maximum security prison in Wisconsin, where he was serving 999 years. He was escorted by 3 prison guards. One officer held each arm as he was taken in handcuffs into an elevator. Nobody was taking any chances with the most notorious killer in America. Dahmer was 33 when he told Nancy Glass about his twisted motive for killing 17 men.
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism.
This is for you. He described how he picked up his victims in gay bars and brought them home.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. The person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled.
And he made a startling admission about the evil urges that propelled him to kill.
Do you still feel those same urges? Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions.
A creature of the night, he said he slept most of the day in prison. During the interview, he asked for several breaks.
Can we cut the film here for a minute?
Sure.
Dahmer was murdered by another prison inmate just a year and 10 months after this interview, a form of justice he said he deserved.
That's what I deserve. I deserve death.
As criminal behavioral analysts, we look at how the offender committed the crime and determine why they committed the crime, and that leads us to who committed the crime. In many of these cases, local law enforcement has absolutely no idea who committed the crime and no leads, but criminal behavioral analysis can generate leads as to the type of person who committed the crime. And in many cases across the country, criminal behavioral analysis has led to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the offenders.
Use denigration and ridicule and humiliation as a control mechanism in the following way. In the cult, it has become your new family. And your whole status in this new family depends on them liking you and treating you nice. And if the leader keeps making fun and showing that you're a dope and that you just are a bad person, then you're so humiliated all the time. And you're going to keep working, trying to get in his graces and try to get some praise from the other people, so that in a rather harmful way, it's used as a motivator. It's not a health-producing, mental health-producing motivator. But within those tight, controlled confines,
has a desire deep down of bringing down other people in a way that they feel brought down. And that leads to extremes.
According to Kilduff's research, people were working inhumane hours, often 7 days a week, on the temple's various programs. At the temple itself, members were forced to confess to fabricated crimes for which they would be given vicious beatings. Ex-members asserted even children were being abused in this way. According to their descriptions, Jones was a classic cult leader, using spirituality to exert power psychologically and sexually over his cult. Cults share certain defining characteristics. In a cult, leaders recruit members through deceptive techniques that rob them of their identity and individuality. Experts have termed these techniques thought reform.
Thought
reform is a systematic effort which has two stages. One is the breakdown stage with heavy confession and a breakdown of one's own psychic integrity. And then there's the second stage, which is re-education, trying to remake a person into a new person.
The term brainwashing is a popular term describing what's classically called a thought reform program. And all those terms mean that a person or an organization has put into place a coordinated program of coercive influence and behavior control. See, the word cult refers to the relationship between the followers and the leader, in which the leader is all-powerful. And then the way the leaders, as we say in psychology, shape the behavior, make the person adopt the policies and attitudes, is done through a thought reform program. Merely puts into place ways to get you to put your old value system aside and make your decisions based on what you know the cult leader wants and will reward. But you're still making decisions, but you're making them in the context of what will keep you from getting in trouble and what will get you rewards within the cult.
Narcissists have a sixth sense about which child to choose to be a safe victim for their supply. So what the narcissist does is they break that child down more by molesting them.